started, you should have already watched Chapter 23, Part 1 on the Enlightenment American Revolution. This is Part 2 of Chapter 23 on the French Revolution. If you haven't, please make sure that you have watched the French Revolution documentary, all right? And the point of this lecture is to give a quick kind of overview, rundown, and just make sure you really understand the main events of the French Revolution, why it happened, and ultimately, why does it fail? Why is it that the American Revolution succeeds and the French Revolution fails? Which, I don't know about you, because on the surface, it almost feels like the American Revolution should have failed. A bunch of colonists should have failed, and the established French people, you know, a long-standing European country, monarch, should have succeeded, yet it's the opposite. So kind of getting a better understanding of that. So so we're gonna get started. I'm gonna move through this pretty quickly because again, this is meant to be kind of an overview, and that French Revolution video is supposed to kind of give you every little detail. And then this lecture is supposed to just be kind of a quick overview. So this will be a little faster, a little less detailed than maybe some of our other ones, okay? And then if I've assigned that worksheet or questions, whatever I assigned to go with this chapter, make sure you have that, okay? And stuff. So let's get started. So setting the stage, you know, there's always, revolutions don't just happen overnight. You have to understand, when it's a political revolution, they're bloody. That means people are going to die. And whether it was the American Revolution or the French Revolution, someone's going to die. People don't just want to give up power. Monarchs don't just overnight, or countries don't just overnight decide, oh, okay, yeah, sure, you can have your freedom, or sure, I'll give up power. Like, that doesn't just happen overnight, okay? So when we have a political revolution, you automatically have to know that people are going to die. So there have to be problems or deep-rooted issues that make people willing to die. So that must mean it's really bad. That must mean it's really bad. So what were some of those problems or causes of, you know, that the French were facing? Well, they had debt from the French and Indian War, right? They had globally fought the British and had caused a ton of debt, okay? They had debt from fighting the American Revolution. While this felt good for their ego, this was terrible for their pocketbook, right? And we talked a little bit about this during the American Revolution. They could not afford this, yet their ego got in the way. Have you ever done something that you knew you shouldn't do, but your ego got in the way? I do that stuff all the time. You know, I shouldn't have said that, but I did it anyways. It felt good. There's a lot of things the French shouldn't have done during that time, but it felt good, you know? And it felt so good to defeat the British and help those colonists to get their independence, to stick it to the big bad British who are always, you know, beating up. It's kind of like the school bully, you know, finally getting their piece, but now you're going to get in trouble for it, you know. And the French, it's catching up with them, you know, a lot of those problems. There's just so much gap between the rich and the poor. The poor are paying all the taxes, and the rich are living a really, really good life. So the French are having a really hard time leading up to the French Revolution. There were three major social classes in France, okay? There was the first estate, the second estate, and the third estate. So the first estate was the clergy, the heads of the church. The second estate was the nobility, so the heads of state, monarchs, you know, lords, nobility, and then there was the third estate. So this is basically your middle, lower classes. So your business owners, your doctors, your lawyers, your educated classes, your peasants, your farmers, your merchants, everybody else, 90% or more of the population, okay, is who made up the third estate. Who paid all the taxes? The third estate. So literally the church paid no taxes, and the nobility, your lords and monarchs and everything, paid no taxes. So can you imagine the most wealthy portion of your population pays no taxes? Pays no taxes, yet your middle lower class pays all the taxes. Yet who makes all the decision? The nobility. So the people who pay no taxes make all the decisions, spend all the money, yet the people who pay all the taxes make no decisions. There's a huge deficit in spending, which means you're spending more than you're making. There's a shortage of bread. Literally, things are so bad. People are lining up 3, 4 a.m. to buy bread, and there isn't even enough bread for people to buy. They're running out by 8 a.m. Okay, and their king, King Louis, is just living the life and doesn't even seem to care. Keeps raising taxes and spending money. And, you know, his people are like, dude, we got to do something. Like, this is not okay. Maybe they're not calling him dude. That probably wouldn't go over well. But you know what I mean? They're saying, you know, like, this is not okay. But he doesn't seem to be paying any attention. He was very weak, as you saw in the video, out of touch, and not really concerned with what was going on with his people. And over time, this is going to catch up with him. The third estate, this lower class, this middle class, tried to meet with the king, tried to go to him and claim, we need rights, we need a change. And so they called a meeting of the National Assembly, which hadn't met in over 175 years, you guys, okay? 175 years since this meeting had been taken place. And the king doesn't come. The king doesn't come. They're locked out. They're denied this meeting. And I'm sorry, what choice are you given then when you're literally starving, you're paying all the taxes, and your first and second estate ignores you? What choice are you given? It's like they drove the people to it. Nobody wants to go die. No, people just want to think about it day to day. People just want to get up and go to work. People of France were no different than anybody else. Nobody just wants to start a revolution. They're everyday people like you and I. They just want to get up and go to work. They want to take care of their family. People don't want to revolt. Most people don't. You know, there's those radicals here and there, but most people just want a day-to-day life. But when you can't feed your family, when you can't live, you know, you're kind of backed in a corner sometimes. And this is sort of what happened to that third estate. So finally, the official beginning of the I guess you could call French Revolution is the storming of Bastille, right? Okay, the storming of Bastille in July of 1789 is going to signal the very beginning of the revolution, where this third estate, they're denied their rights, they're denied, you know, a meeting with the first and second estates, they're denied anything. They don't have bread. Everyone is ignoring them. Their king is ignoring them. There isn't even enough bread. They're paying all the taxes. They're literally starving. They're storming the castle. And finally, they storm Bastille. They grab their weapons. The first shots are fired, and boom, the revolution has begun. Okay? And we see the writings then of their first version of a constitution. Okay? And it's called the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Now, the American Revolution the American Constitution is going to inspire other constitutions, okay? Just like the Magna Carta becomes the first constitution, it inspires other constitutions. The American Revolution and their constitution will inspire other revolutions and other constitutions. So the Declaration of Rights of Man was modeled after the United States Constitution. Now, the original goal was not to get rid of the monarch. They didn't want to go from having a monarchy to absolute no monarchy. That was not the original goal. The original goal was to set up a limited monarchy, a bit like what Britain had, right? To have a constitution that their monarch would have to listen to. They're like, Louis, we just need you to listen. We need there to be fair taxes. We need that when we have needs that you have to pay attention, okay? A bit like what England had. So the original goal was to set up a limited monarchy, which is a step, right, in the direction toward a republic, but it's not moving all the way. So think of like a pendulum, and absolute monarchies on one end and republics on the other end. A limited monarchy's in the middle. So their goal originally was not to go all the way to an absolute or a republic. So the revolution has officially begun, and now we move into the official stages of the revolution. Well, how did Louis respond? Well, the way he usually responds, okay? He didn't really do anything, okay? Unfortunately, he didn't really do anything. He is passive, he doesn't like it well, and so he just kind of sits there. He doesn't really do much. He doesn't really take an interest in what the people need. And in fact, within 2 years, he and his wife try to escape the country. Can you imagine if our president tries to like escape the country? Like, how cowardly is that? I'm sorry, that's right, I'm gonna say it. Like, what a betrayal to the people. And you saw in the video, not only does he try to escape, but then he's caught. So think about what a betrayal this is to the people. okay? So first he's passive and won't listen to them as they're starving. And then when there finally is a limited monarchy, he's really resistant to work with them. He's dragging his feet. And then he and his wife try to leave the country. By 1792, France is at war with a lot of Europe. Their monarch has tried to leave the country. They tried, remember Marie Antoinette is from Austria, so they tried to escape to Austria to gain support to basically bring back an army. And this completely throws France into turmoil. Okay, so it was already in turmoil. This throws it to the next level. And it opens the door for the political party, the Jacobins, to fully take force. How can you work with a monarch who literally is trying to escape? And the Jacobins now have the evidence that they need to go from a limited monarchy all the way to a republic and get rid of the monarchy. Now, they were a very radical political group, okay, who never really wanted to have the monarchy. They wanted to get rid of the monarchy. And a lot of people felt this was going too far. How can we go from having an absolute monarchy to literally getting rid of them? A lot of people felt they needed to have a middle road. But once the monarchs tried to escape, those moderates, I would say, who said, no, we need to work with the monarchy. We need to, make it work and be reasonable. And as long as we have fair taxes, it'll work out. They lost all credibility because the monarch tried to leave, right? And so the Jacobins quickly gain popularity and get their way. And they declare war against the monarchs because they tried to escape, which is, it doesn't get much worse than that. By 1792, the Jacobins have enough support that they are able to execute, they are able to basically abolish the monarchy, okay? So remove all power of the monarchy and establish a national assembly that has all power, okay? Controlled by the Jacobins and Robespierre, right, that you see in the video. By 1793, King Louis and Marie Antoinette are executed. They go as far as to execute their monarch. Now, a lot of people didn't want them executed, but a lot of people were outraged. And that momentum, the Jacobins were able to kind of seize that momentum and go all the way with it. And that momentum is like a runaway train that quickly goes too far. This right here is why the French Revolution fails. Revolutions can get out of hand, and when killing becomes the solution to everything, now given, people have to die. Political revolutions, people die. It just is a fact of life. I know that's a harsh thing to say, but show me a political revolution where people don't die, where there's an actual overthrow of government. It happens, okay? It's going to happen, all right? But when you go to the extent that you start lining people up and you start killing them at a guillotine because they disagree with you, now you've gone too far. Now you've gone so far that that's not a republic. A democracy is a difference of opinion, right? Where people can express their opinion. And the Jacobins went from, okay, we need to get rid of the monarchs. That's one thing to get rid of them. To anyone who disagrees with them, you guys saw this in the video, what happens to them? You execute them. Well, how is that a republic? A republic is majority rule, right? That means there's a disagreement and a lot about 50-50. Usually it's going to come real close, or 55-45. Like usually the population's pretty close. Okay, it's usually not a landslide. But the Jacobins went so extreme with it that anyone who disagreed with them on anything, they executed them. And the guillotine, which, okay, was anybody else floored by this? They literally hired Dr. Guillotine, right? A doctor to find a humane way to execute people. Are you kidding me? Like, what is this? Like, what? Are you kidding me? This is crazy, right? This is crazy. That they have a machine that they believe they are justified. But, oh, we care about you so much, we're going to find a humane way to kill you. How about you just don't kill people? And this is where they go too far. This is why they fail. They don't know how to take somebody not disagreeing with them. This is why most revolutions fail. I'm basically giving away the plot right now. Most revolutions fail because people don't know how to be good losers. The Jacobins got power, but then they didn't know how to take it. What if somebody disagrees with us? What if we lose power? Oh, do you see where I'm going with this? It's one thing to gain power, but people want to hold on to power. And people out of fear of losing power, do you see what I'm saying? Will do anything to protect it. aka execute people, get rid of people that don't agree with them. That's not democracy, that's tyranny, right? And it's a fine line. And that's what I've been saying all year. Democracy, republic, it's a very fragile thing. The moment we don't accept the outcome of an election, now given, it has to be a truthful election, right? You know what I mean? If it's rigged, then obviously, that's not fair and that has to be investigated and things like that. But if it's a fair, true election, you know what I mean? The process has been done, the majority of people have spoken, then that has to be respected whether or not you like the outcome. And so honestly, I think what people forget sometimes, and I think even our society is struggling with sometimes, is that a republic or a democracy is not about getting your way. It's about the majority getting their way. And if that means you're not in the majority for that election or that time, part of the preservation of a democracy or republic is being a good loser. I know that sounds really bad, but that's the truth. And the French, the Jacobins, were not good losers, right? What did they do? They executed 40,000 people just in Paris alone, just for the suspicion of not agreeing with them. Any politician that didn't agree with them, they wiped out every other political party that didn't agree with them. Over nothing, over nothing. You looked at me wrong. You didn't show enough support. Neighbors turning in neighbors, relatives turning in relatives, just for the suspicion to appear to look right. I'm going to turn you in before you turn me in so that nobody suspects me. It was absolute craziness, absolute craziness. So 1793 to 1794 become known as the Reign of Terror because it's just so out of control. Okay, and the guillotine becomes this focus of just absolute control, which then reinforces the tyranny of the Jacobins. So they call it a republic, they can call it whatever they want, a democracy, but it was so far from that, right? Because that is not an expression of freedom, it's an expression of oppression. After this extreme phase, okay, I don't know about you, it seemed very fitting that the end of the guillotine was the execution of Robespierre, okay, who was promoting this so much, all right, and this finally came to an end. They would put this up on a big scaffold so that people could see it, and so it definitely makes it more dramatic. And the thing about the guillotine that people liked, so the original guillotine, before it was called that, it had a straight blade. See how it's angled? And the straight blade was more of a chopping motion, so it didn't always sever the head the first time. So Dr. Guillotine, one of the things he did to modify it was he did an angled blade. So with the weight of the blade when it would fall, that angled motion, it would actually slice when it would hit with the weight of the motion. And so that slicing motion created more of a guarantee of severing the head the first time, therefore, in quotes, making it a more humane execution. I know some of you are like, are you kidding me? No, I'm not. I'm not kidding you, okay? And they were praised for this, all right? Finally, the Reign of Terror comes to an end, 1794. The French realized, like, this has gotten out of control. This has gone way too far. Like, this has gone way too far, okay? And from 1795 to 1794, we have the Directory, okay, which is kind of this board of elected officials, representatives that will take control. They get rid of the Declaration of Rights of Man. There's a new constitution. It's chaos again, okay? And this is when a new man, Napoleon Bonaparte, who had been at war with Europe for a lot of this time, so he'd been outside of France for a lot of this time, fighting a lot of Europe and having a lot of success, being declared a hero. He'd been fighting Austria and Spain and other countries. You have to understand, France is kind of a laughing stock of Europe. When they lost the French and Indian War, nobody really took the French seriously. We're going to kind of talk about this as we get into especially the 18th, 19th, 20th century. They lose a lot of wars. I'm just going to say it, okay? So people don't really take them seriously. So the French always feel like they have to prove themselves. They're always kind of trying to make up for their reputation. And so Napoleon Bonaparte had some success in war, and so he was declared a hero, and the French really loved him. By 1799, the monarch obviously is completely gone. The church is under state control. You saw in the video, I mean, they changed the calendar, they changed the dates, they changed everything. I mean, they even gotten rid of Christendom in France. I mean, they had just gone so far. It was kind of crazy. Nationalism was growing. There was some stability brought back, but it was still just it was still just chaos, and there was no sense of normalcy. The little bit of stability that people actually sought, they had gone so extreme. People were exhausted. Like, this isn't what we signed up for. We just wanted fair taxes and bread, and look at what we've gotten. We have no monarch. There's no going back. The Jacobins have executed people like crazy. And it's kind of, have you ever, like, something's gotten totally out of hand and you're just like, how did we get here? Like, this is not what we expected. And it was a runaway train. And for the French, the French Revolution was a runaway train. Then we enter the third and final phase of the French Revolution, okay? The Directory quickly, Napoleon Bonaparte rises up within the Directory and sees an opportunity for power. He became a part of a three-man consulate in 1799 and quickly moves himself up, declares himself first consul or leader of the consul by 1802, and by 1804 declares himself Emperor of France. So look at what's happened in 12 years. 1792 or 1793, sorry, the French execute their monarchy, and 11 years later they have an emperor again. So within 11 years they're right back to having a dictatorship. So they've come full circle. So what was the point? Do you see what I'm saying? This revolution just took on a life of its own and completely lost its focus, okay? Which was just to bring some balance and some representation to the tax system. That the third estate shouldn't be bearing all the burden, and that the first and second estate needed to be in tune with that, right? And that limited monarchy would have done that, okay? Really just a king who was in tune would have done that, but just a limited monarchy would have done that. Or if the Jacobins had been reasonable or allowed political parties from the first place. But the thing was, they had no training, they had no experience. And so when you have no experience, things quickly get out of control. Now, Napoleon was popular. He knew how people were so desperate for stability, and he brought stability. So people almost didn't care at this point. You understand, they're 15 years into a revolution. People are exhausted. Okay? They're like, I just want a job. I just want to be able to feed my kids. I don't really care who's in charge anymore. I just, desperate times call for desperate measures. So he brings it. He brings price control. He opens up public schools. He brings back the church. He, just brings back normalcy. Okay? Equality before the law, a religious toleration, merit-based systems, like normalcy again. And people are just like kind of the old France they knew, but in a better version. And guess what? People are like, yes, this is what we just wanted the first place. We wanted a fair tax system. We wanted the church to be responsible and to not hoard so much money. This is just a bit of what we wanted in the first place. Like, why couldn't this have been done in the first place? And so the French people loved him. They didn't care that they had a dictator, an emperor. They were just so excited to have stability. And then Napoleon decided to take it to the next level. He's like, I am going to reinstate the greatness of France. Now you have to understand, the French have been humiliated. The French and Indian War, now they've had the French Revolution. Nobody in Europe respects them, okay? They're kind of the laughing stock. Let's just keep it real. They are, okay? Nobody respects them, and they want respect. And Napoleon says, I'm going to bring back that respect. And the French people are like, let's do it, okay? And so he sets out to create a grand empire. And as this map shows you, he does it, all right? He invades Austria, revenge for Marie Antoinette. He invades Spain and kills, puts his brother on the throne. He creates chaos wherever he goes, and eventually sees himself to invade Russia. And in fact, while he does all this, there are going to be revolutions throughout the Caribbean and South America, because most of South America was colonized by the Spanish and the Portuguese, right? And so this gave an opportunity for these colonies who were super distracted by Napoleon to rebel. The Spanish is a complete mess. The Portuguese are hiding out in Brazil. So there was a real opportunity for rebellion while this is going on. So these revolutions in France are going to inspire revolutions in South America. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on, how
the American Revolution inspires the French Revolution, and the French Revolution inspires the South American revolutions. Also gives opportunity because Napoleon's causing such chaos that Spain and Portugal are so distracted by this that it's a great opportunity for these colonies to rebel. Russia became a huge campaign for Napoleon. All right, Russia was a sense of resources. It was a feather in his cap, and so Napoleon sets out to take them on. And so far, he had had great success in Europe. Okay, I mean, he had conquered most things he had taken and was creating this grand empire and really just, I mean, destroying Europe. But he makes a huge mistake. So he sends literally the largest army anyone had ever seen into one pure invasion. He sends a 600,000 man army marching into Russia. But he makes a mistake. They invade in the fall. What happens in Russia in the fall? Anybody? It gets really cold. It gets really cold, okay? So they invade in the fall, and it starts to get really cold. Now, Russia was not prepared for an invasion, not even close, okay? By the time they get there, it starts to get really cold. Really, really cold, really, really fast. Like, not France cold, like Russia cold, okay? Like, you better bundle up and find somewhere inside. And the Russians have this principle of things like, if I can't have it, no one can have it. So as the Russians basically retreated, they did what was called scorched earth, which is that they burn everything. Now, here's what I mean by burn everything, okay? They literally would burn the barn, they would kill the animals, they would burn the forest. So as the soldiers would progress, there was no shelter for them, there was no firewood for them, and there were no animals for them to eat. So as the French soldiers progressed, they literally starved to death and they froze to death. It's kind of a brilliant strategy. It's like, if I can't have it, you can't have it. So by the time the French military returned, only 10,000 men returned. Now, Russia, a lot of things were destroyed, but they were successful in defeating Napoleon in his campaign. And it inspired the rest of the European countries to finally see a weakness in Napoleon and to rise up together and like, okay, we got to take this man down. So what was his downfall? Well, the rise of nationalism and other European countries, the invasion of Russia failing, and so it put basically Napoleon on the run. So he will abdicate the throne in 1813. How many of you have ever heard of little man syndrome? Have you ever heard of that before? Okay, we're going to talk about that. That actually starts with Napoleon, and we'll talk about that, all right? By 1815, he is exiled. Now he tries to return. He raises up an army and he tries to return, and they have to go after him again. I won't go into all the details and stuff, but put it this way, this man did not go down without a fight, okay? He was determined, and the reality was the French people did not want him to go. He was their hero. He had restored their greatness. He had brought back stability. So to the French, and even in French history, he is hailed a hero, but to all of the rest of Europe, he is seen as a pain in the butt. He is declared, they see him as cocky and just causing a nuisance, who went through and just made nothing but problems. So it took 2 invasions to get him off the throne, but by the middle of 1815, he was gone. So he was quite a short man. So what is his legacy? His legacy is, a constitution, elections, property rights, education. He brings the revolution kind of to an end. He sparks nationalism, the Louisiana Territory. He really does kind of rebuild the strength of France. But at the end of the day, it doesn't accomplish anything it was supposed to accomplish. They don't have a republic. They don't have a lasting constitution. They don't have the stability that they needed. And he created absolute chaos in Europe. It's absolute chaos in Europe. And he had a reputation, what was called little man syndrome, and stuff. So, sorry, I messed up on the last slide, so I'll just explain it really quick on this slide, then I'll talk about Congress of Vienna and close this out. So he was known as little man syndrome because the British measurement system was different than the French. So the rumor started that he was actually shorter than he was. Now, he was a shorter than average man, so let me clarify that. He was a shorter than average man, but the British started rumors that he was extremely short, and he was short. And so this is why he was always painted like on a throne or on a horse to appear larger than he was, to appear greater than he was. And he had a very fiery temper. He was very quick to, any kind of challenge or anybody to kind of jump in the fight, real fiery, kind of making up for his height. And so this is where this kind of little man syndrome started up, that, he was insecure. So he always had to kind of be overly aggressive. And people like to make fun of him for this, or the media and outside countries, especially Great Britain, like to make fun of him for this. This is kind of where this rumor started. But it was actually exaggerated how short he was, okay? So 1815 was a meeting of European countries to put Europe back together again. Have you ever heard the nursery rhyme, Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men could put Humpty Dumpty back together again, okay? That's a great metaphor for Europe, okay? That Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall and Napoleon pushed it off the wall, and the Congress of Vienna is trying to put it all back together again. So the Congress of Vienna in 1815 is the meeting of European countries coming together to try to restore stability and create order after the chaos that Napoleon, has created for all these years, okay? So what did they do? Well, they looked at the boundaries prior to Napoleon and they reinstated those boundaries, okay? So they're like, prior to Napoleon, what are the boundaries again, okay? They restored hereditary monarchs. So they went back to Spain and they found a relative. They went even into France and found a relative of Louis within Louis's family and put them on the throne. So everything kind of went back the way it was supposed to go. So here's France at the end of the day. They've executed their monarchs. They try to have a republic. They it fails. They have Napoleon, and now they go right back to a monarchy with not even their original monarch, which the children of King Louis and Marie Antoinette all died, right? So they ended up with some cousin of Louis, so not even one of the intended monarchs. So it's like they end up almost worse off than they started in the first place. And tried to create a concrete balance of power to suppress this idea of revolution again, because they didn't want this happening in another country or another uprising within France. So here we are, 25 years later, and what's been accomplished? Not much. France at least has some stability, but at the end of the day, it's been 25 years of chaos, and so much damage has been done, not only within France, but within a lot of parts of Europe. And everybody's just exhausted and tired and doesn't want anything to do with it. So the ultimate question, why ultimately did the French Revolution fail? Well, first off, okay, the monarchs wouldn't cooperate. That's one of the first reasons. If King Louis and Marie Antoinette had been reasonable and had worked with the people, had worked with the Constitution in some way, shape, or form, had worked with the revolution, let's be honest, had just worked with the people even before the revolution, this could have been avoided. Okay, if they had been reasonable and there had been some reform, it could have been avoided. Second, the Jacobins went way too extreme. They just went way too extreme. Way too extreme. You can't suppress all freedom of speech. Anytime you suppress freedom of speech, I don't care what it is. Now, freedom of speech is different from speech that will hurt people. If I say, I'm going to kill you, that's different. But when you start suppressing people because you don't agree with them, just because it's a difference of opinion, I'm sorry, we're in trouble. Okay, and I don't care what it is, we're in trouble. And the Jacobins start to suppress anyone who disagrees with them. That's not a republic, that's a tyranny. So here's the ultimate reason. Here's the most important reason. They weren't ready. You have to train to do it. The reason the American colonists were successful is they were used to a limited monarchy in Britain. So imagine a pendulum, one extreme to the other. If on one extreme you have a monarchy, an absolute monarchy, in the middle is a limited monarchy, and then the other extreme is a republic. Okay? The American colonists, which were British citizens, right? Okay? Had been used to a limited monarchy, which is in the middle. They were used to some representation, which means they didn't expect to always get their way. They just at least wanted a say. It means I want a right to vote. Doesn't mean I'm always going to get my way.
but I at least want my right to vote. So when they went from a limited monarchy to a republic, it was the next step. They didn't jump from absolute monarchy all the way to a republic. They had been trained at least to have a limited monarchy, so they knew to an extent what it took. Plus, they had leaders who were disciplined enough to know how to enforce it. Good losers. It means you don't always get your way. The French had no experience. The Jacobins proved that. They had no experience because the moment they were challenged with anyone who disagreed with them, what did they do? They executed them. So the reason the French Revolution ultimately failed, and the reason I'm telling you, every revolution will fail the first time it tries in history. Many fail, many still don't have stable, democratic, true democratic or republic governments. We'll talk about this so many times, is because people are not good losers. They don't know how to accept an outcome when it doesn't go their way. And let's be real, even in our own society, this is hard sometimes, right? The 2020 elections were hard. People were either really ecstatic about it or were really upset about it. And the reality is that no matter how you feel about it, the only preservation of democracy, of a republic, is accepting the outcome, even when it doesn't go your way. Or when it does go your way, to be gracious about it. And to realize that the pendulum always shifts. You might have gotten your way this time. Next time, will you get your way, and how will you handle it? Do you know what I mean? And that is almost more important than winning an election. What's most important is preserving that so that we can have elections, so that the pendulum can keep shifting, right? That majority rules. Because in the reality, the best ultimate thing is meeting the majority needs, right? All right. And I know that's hard. We want to meet our individual needs, and we hope sometimes that the pendulum will shift our way, whatever that is. And sometimes it goes our way and we're like, yes, and sometimes it doesn't and we're like, no. But at the end of the day, the pendulum goes back and forth. But the preservation of democracy is so important, because when you lose that, you have tyranny. You have tyranny. And we'll talk about this when we get to World War I, World War II, how fragile it is. Communism. This is what happens when you let go of the pendulum. It's a very, very fragile thing. All right, you guys are awesome.